This screencast is to compare aerobic respiration with anaerobic respiration. Aerobic means oxygen, so it's with or without oxygen. The previous screencast, just in the cellular respiration slideshow, was how human cells and eukaryotic cells that have mitochondria would do efficient ATP production using oxygen, using the mitochondria. Up to 38 ATP can be made per glucose molecule. This is much less efficient, but yet some organisms can only do this and only can work in the presence or without oxygen. And then sometimes our own cells will turn into this type of respiration kind of in an emergency situation. So we'll kind of go through a couple scenarios, but sometimes there's no oxygen. And what's going to happen instead of the cellular respiration with oxygen, the aerobic respiration, we're going to call it fermentation. Maybe you've heard of that before as far as like making wine and some things like that. But fermentation, or to ferment, is the less efficient way to make ATP without oxygen. Both aerobic respiration and anaerobic respiration will start with glycolysis in the cytosol or cytoplasm of the cell, where the 1 6-carbon glucose molecule is broken down into 2 pyruvate or pyruvic acid molecules. If oxygen is present, it will go to the mitochondria, go through the citric acid cycle or Krebs cycle, and then the electron transport chain, and it make a whole bunch of ATP. But if it's not present, fermentation will occur, and then the byproducts are going to be different. It's going to be ethanol and carbon dioxide, or it can be lactate or lactic acid, and then ATP is made, but it's much, much less. Looking at anaerobic respiration, also called fermentation, it occurs after glycolysis. If there's no oxygen, it doesn't make any more ATP after the 2 ATPs made from glycolysis, but it does kind of help the process along, and I'll explain that in just a bit. The first type is alcoholic fermentation, and that is going to be in plants such as grapes. It's how wine is made, how beer is made, things like that. As far as the byproducts are going to be ethyl alcohol, which is ethanol, the consumable form of alcohol, and then carbon dioxide, some bubbles. It's also used in baking, though. Yeast will make CO2 to make bread rise, cakes rise, things like that, and the alcohol is burned off in the process of baking it in that situation. The second type of fermentation is occurring in animals, such as you, and it's called lactic acid fermentation. The glycolysis will occur, and then the second stage is where lactic acid is made. So instead of making alcohol, the ethanol, and carbon dioxide with the different cells, lactic acid made. So this you may have felt before as far as burning in your muscles. And when your body will naturally automatically switch over to lactic acid fermentation is when it can't get enough oxygen to the cells to do the intense exercise that it's trying to do. So if you're doing a long-term, run, a jog, walking, just kind of like typical long-term exercise, you're mainly going to be using very efficient aerobic respiration. But if you're doing an intense sprint, a power lift, something that's really intense, needs just a ton of energy right now on the spot, you can't get the heart beating fast enough and the blood circulating fast enough to get oxygen to your cells as quickly as needed to make the ATP necessary to do those cell functions. So it's going to switch over to anaerobic respiration, and one of the byproducts is going to be lactic acid. That will make your muscles burn a little bit, things like that. And the big negative, the positive is you can continue to make the energy, get the quick, fast energy that you need. The negative is definitely the lactic acid buildup, but also that it's not very efficient. It can't be done for very long. The sprinting, you can only sprint for a little bit. You can't sprint for a long period of time. You can do aerobic respiration and run a marathon, run for a long distance, jog for a long distance, but you can't sprint for a long time. It's just kind of the trade-off that you get the quick, fast, immediate energy, but it's not very efficient and it does not last very long. These are a couple good videos to look at, kind of silly, but to go through the process. And here is again the function. That no more ATP is made after glycolysis when the lactic acid or the ethanol and carbon dioxide are made, but it does regenerate these energy carrier molecules and does kind of help continue the process. So that's kind of an important aspect of that. Here's a couple different types of fermentation. Anaerobic respiration. Depending on what organism is doing it, there's different byproducts, different things. And then this is the big thing, comparing anaerobic respiration without oxygen, making only 2 ATP as far as the net ATP and some byproducts that may or may not be what you're looking for, versus aerobic respiration with oxygen is much more efficient. It needs oxygen. It happens in the mitochondria as far as the second two steps, and it can make up to 30 ATP, so it's much more efficient. It's longer lasting, can sustain for a longer period of time as well.